You might think that after fully loading a cargo ship, known as a container ship, the biggest challenge or problem they might face during the journey. It could be an extremely rough and violent sea capable of putting the entire crew and the safety of the ship itself, loaded with valuable cargo, at risk. But actually, that's just one of the problems the crew might face during the long journey, which can last more than 30 or 40 days. One of the serious problems they might encounter is pirate ships. They always attack by surprise, are faster than the ship, and to make things worse, they come armed, usually with AKMs, ready to invade, steal, and take control of the ship. To give you an idea, from 2010 to 2020, there were approximately 2,865 cases of piracy recorded worldwide, including coastal and international waters. According to the International Maritime Bureau, the specialized department of the International Chamber of Commerce. But the numbers point to a trend of continuous decline in attacks over these years. But what are these pirates looking for on the ships? How do they manage to get access to the ship, considering that the height from the water level to the nearest entrance is over 10 meters? And how do cargo ships defend themselves against these pirate attacks? Maritime piracy has been present at various moments in history and dates back to the early days of maritime navigation, after the American continent was colonized. From the 15th century onward, piracy progressed until it reached its golden age in the 18th century and declined at the beginning of the 19th century. And in the 20th and 21st centuries, in general, maritime piracy has been decreasing significantly thanks to the implementation of international anti-piracy measures, such as the creation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982, along with coordinated law enforcement efforts and naval patrols in high-risk areas, which have helped reduce maritime piracy rates globally. But what is maritime piracy? Well, you can imagine that after loading a ship with hundreds of containers, there's a lot of valuable cargo on board. From cars of all types and standards, clothing including luxury apparel, jewelry, and all sorts of other items, machinery and machine parts, structures, electronics, food, chemicals, raw materials, military equipment, and everything else that keeps the world moving. And all of this is loaded into a single vehicle, in this case, the ship. That's why they soon attract all kinds of criminals. Not to mention the bulk carriers that transport minerals, coal, and grains, the oil tankers that carry oil, and the passenger ships. All of them are targets for pirate attacks. Maritime piracy refers to acts of violence, robbery, or kidnapping that occur in coastal or international waters by criminal groups known as pirates. The term pirate refers to an outlaw who, either alone or organized in groups, sails the seas with the sole purpose of looting and plundering ships and cities to gain wealth and power. In other words, a pirate is any thief who attacks by sea. Maritime pirates usually use small, fast boats and weapons to board commercial ships, oil tankers, fishing vessels, and even passenger ships. Their activities can range from simple cargo theft to kidnapping crew members for extortion, or when there are political problems between countries, and also for financing terrorist groups. In addition, there are also more extreme cases where physical assaults, torture, and even murders occur. Maritime piracy can occur in different parts of the globe, but it has been more prevalent in areas such as the Gulf of Aden, located in the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Gulf of Guinea. These areas are particularly vulnerable due to factors such as busy trade routes, poorly policed waters, and precarious socio-economic conditions in coastal regions, which leave the way open for attacks by these groups. As soon as ships leave port fully loaded, enter the high seas, and begin sailing through international waters, that's when they become most vulnerable to a pirate attack. Mainly because these ships travel at low speeds due to the mass of the vessel. They have a very small crew, usually made up of 20 to 30 members, and they don't have any kind of escort vessel. In short, ideal conditions and an open path for the pirates. The attack strategy used by the pirates is often quite sophisticated. In fact, it is already considered organized crime, since the pirates are very efficient at what they do. They run sophisticated operations using the most modern equipment, such as satellite phones, GPS devices, networked computers, and communication radios, in order to gather prior information about the most valuable cargo, which ship it is on, and the location of the ship's route. This information can be provided by people who were at some point on board the ship and had the opportunity to gather this information. Alternatively, what may be happening is the so-called maritime fraud. In other words, insiders related to the loading sector who sell information about the cargo, the coordinates of where the ship will sail, and the exact location of the highest value cargo. In other words, things are much more complicated, and it's not just limited to the attack itself necessarily. With all this information in hand, the pirates choose the best spot to carry out the attack, which can happen either during the day or at night. The attack is very quick and carried out in boats much faster than the ship, and the attack always comes from the sides of the ship. They can then use a ladder or throw a rope with a hook at the end to board the ship. Once on board, they start subduing the crew and committing thefts. And the consequences of piracy are significant. Besides the thefts and material damage caused to the ship and cargo, there are kidnappings, among other things. There is also a significant economic impact due to increased insurance costs and security measures adopted by shipping companies, which choose longer but safer routes. Hiring specialized security teams, among other things, and all of this directly impacts the cost and delivery time of goods, making trips much longer and the final cost higher for the consumer. But of course, knowing the value of the cargo these ships carry and their vulnerability at sea, companies and governments take some measures to improve the security of these vessels and avoid becoming such easy targets, right? After all, about 90% of all goods transported in the world are carried by ships. So how do they defend against these attacks? Well, the international community has been making efforts to combat maritime piracy through a series of measures. This includes naval patrols by various navies, meaning heavily armed ships that carry out constant patrols and sweeps in regions considered high risk. Military aircraft are also used to cover an even larger area in search of suspicious vessels. If any are found, they proceed to neutralize them. The other measure is the implementation of naval escorts. The ships can be escorted by heavily armed warships, equipped with the most advanced defense systems and tracking capabilities for suspicious vessels. And they can also be escorted by coast guards in high-risk areas, such as the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean near Somalia, or the Strait of Malacca. Naval escort is an effective strategy to deter pirate attacks, as the presence of warships or well-armed security forces creates a safer environment and increases the chance of detecting and responding quickly to any suspicious activity. This security measure is also highly discouraging for pirates. The other measure is the introduction of armed security teams. Many ships employ private security teams, which are made up of trained and armed personnel. These teams act as a line of defense in case of a pirate attack and can take measures to repel or neutralize the threat. The other measure is physical protection. Ships can be designed with physical protection measures, such as electric fences, barbed wire, security bars on windows and doors, and armored doors to make it harder for pirates to board. And there are many other security measures adopted to ensure the safety of the vessel and the crew on board. One of the largest pirate attacks recorded in modern history was the one that occurred in April 2009, known as the hijacking of the MV Maersk, Alabama. The American flag ship operated by the company Maersk Line was boarded by Somali pirates in the Indian Ocean near the coast of Somalia. In the incident, a group of armed Somali pirates managed to board the ship and take control of it. However, the crew of the MV Maersk, Alabama, led by Captain Richard Phillips, performed evasive maneuvers to avoid the complete capture of the vessel. Captain Phillips voluntarily offered himself to be held hostage by the pirates, allowing the remaining crew of the ship to stay safe. The hijacking of the MV Maersk, Alabama attracted international media attention and resulted in a rescue operation conducted by the United States Navy. After a tense standoff lasting several days, the American Navy SEALs successfully rescued Captain Phillips in an operation that resulted in the death of 3 pirates and the capture of a 4th. This incident exemplifies the threat of maritime piracy in the region of Somalia, which has been one of the areas most affected by piracy in recent decades. However, thanks to coordinated efforts by warships, shipping companies, and international security forces, including naval escort operations and maritime patrols, piracy incidents have decreased in the region in recent years. As we've seen, sailing the seas is not just about traveling and being alert to bad weather and rough seas, which can put the safety of cargo and passenger ships at risk. In fact, they are constantly exposed to an even greater danger that appears unexpectedly, in this case, a pirate attack, which can result in thefts estimated at millions of dollars, torture, kidnappings, and even murders. But fortunately, there are already major efforts underway that have been significantly reducing this threat.